God gets the final word. Good Friday ends in darkness and death. The broken, lifeless body of Jesus was taken down from the cross and laid in a borrowed tomb. The hopes and dreams that Jesus' ministry had fostered for these 3 years appeared to be gone. The disciples have scattered. Judas has killed himself. Peter has withdrawn in shame. The disciples are hiding. And so many others are trying to make sense of everything that has transpired. Two of the men on the road to Emmaus, pondering all that had happened, said that they thought he would be the one who would redeem Israel. And in the days and the moments between Friday and the early hours of Sunday morning were heavy, hard moments. But then in the quiet stillness of that Sunday morning, something happens. Before anyone sees it, before anyone hears of it, before anyone arrives, God acts. And what does God do? God raises Jesus from the dead. Here in Matthew 28, by the time the women arrive to the tomb, the decisive moment has already taken place. And heaven has to testify, it has to bear witness to what is done. And so we see in the text that the earth shakes and an angel descends, rolls the stone away, and tells the women what has happened, that he is not here, he is risen. The angels roll the stone away, not to let Jesus out because he is already risen, but to allow them to see what God has already done. I love what happens here in this text. The angel talking to Mary, and Mary commissions them to go and to tell the others, tell the disciples that Jesus is risen, that he is going to meet them in Galilee. And as they were traveling, they encounter the resurrected Christ themselves, falling to the ground in both excitement, worship, and fear, grasping Jesus' feet. He tells them, do not be afraid. And these women receive a second commission to go and tell the disciples that I am risen and that I will meet them there. What Matthew does is showing us in this moment, he is teaching us something that is central to our faith. And that is this, that neither human misunderstanding nor failure nor the calculated violence of religious and political power can stop what God purposed to do in his son, Jesus Christ. They killed him, yes, but God raised him from the dead because God gets the final word. And you know what is so striking about two of the most important moments in the life of Jesus, his birth and the resurrection? They happen in a similar way. They're not announced to the powerful, not staged for the world to see, but revealed to the faithful. Because what God often does is God does great things when we least expect it. When things seem dark, when things seem hopeless, when it looks like there's no reason to believe in good, God does something that turns the world upside down, and God does it, and most of the world is completely oblivious. That babe in a manger The hope and promise of the world happened, and most of the world did not see it. And this teacher, this prophet who was put to death is now raised from the dead. It was not announced to the world, but God did it nonetheless. And I think that's a real point of hope for us, that in those moments when it's hard to hold on, to remember that God is still at work, because God is the one who gets the final word, not us. Our first lectionary text, coming from Acts chapter 10, Peter says it so simply, so succinctly, so powerfully. He says they put him to death, but God raised him on the third day. Shows us that humans, they did their worst in crucifying Jesus, but in the act of the resurrection, we see God at God's best, raising his son from the dead. And I wish I could tell you, I wish I could confess to you that this will be the last time you see humans at their worst. But there's so many biblical stories where you see humans at their worst. But my sisters and my brothers, what'll shout you this morning, what'll put a smile on your face, is to look at all the times when humans are at their worst and God is at God's best. Preach, Dr. Brogdon, I'm doing the best I can. If you go back to the book of Exodus, you see humanity at its worst, enslaving the children of Israel. You see God at God's best, freeing his people from the hand of Pharaoh. You see human power at its worst, trying to throw a prophet in the lion's den. You see God at God's best in shutting the mouths of lions. Oh, humans at their worst will do some ugly things. But humans at their worst does not get the final word. No, my sisters and my brothers, God gets the final word. And this point is what makes me so spiritually curious about the moment in which we find ourselves, about the times in which we live. I don't have all the answers. I'm not God. I can't tell you what the future holds. But I am curious that in times past, when you saw humans at their worst, God shows up in a powerful way to do what was unexpected, what was unimaginable. Could it be possible that the same God who did the unimaginable in the life of Jesus is the same God that is with us in 2026? Which is why I have to ask two questions for you. The first question is, why is the story of the resurrection relevant for the church today? I know we have a lot of visitors here in the sanctuary and who are watching online, and they sort of look at the church and we say, and they say, well, this is what you all do. You go to church on Easter. It's an amazing story, but it doesn't have any real relevance for what is going on in the world. I beg to differ. I want to answer the question of why the story of the resurrection is so relevant by also pairing it with, what's up with the name of this sermon, Dr. Brogdon? What do you mean when you say resurrection means God gets the final word? I'm going to give you 3 quick answers, and I'm going to explain what I mean by each. The resurrection keeps us honest about Good Friday. The second thing is that the resurrection reveals God's power through grace. And thirdly, the resurrection refuses to let our failure be final. Why is the resurrection relevant? Well, first of all, because it challenges us to be honest about Good Friday. And I know some of you who are very, very traditional, you don't want to hear the preacher talking about Good Friday on Easter. But if we're truly going to understand Easter, we dare not forget the first part, Good Friday. The Christians, we often label ourselves and describe ourselves as Easter people. But we need to see ourselves as both Good Friday and Easter people. Because Good Friday tells the truth about the nature of this world. It tells truths about us that we must hold in tension with the resurrection. Good Friday is not something that we should easily dismiss. Good Friday is not something that we should easily ignore. Good Friday reminds us that we live in a world where the rejection of good is real, where violence is real, where suffering is real. And we don't try to pretend Good Friday didn't happen because now everything's great. Christ is risen. No. Christ is going to send us out into a Good Friday world with the power of the resurrection. And so we hold both Easter and Good Friday in that tension. And don't sit there for a moment and think, that's kind of a downer, Dr. Brogdon. No, because there's more to Good Friday than just the rejection and the suffering. There are the folks who decided to show up. I'd love to call the roll of the folks who showed up at the cross. It wasn't a whole lot of them. That's why I could call the roll. But Mary showed up at the cross. Mary Magdalene showed up at the cross. John showed up at the cross. There was a wealthy man named Joseph of Arimathea who says, well, he doesn't have a tomb. He can use mine. He's showing up. They couldn't fix what was happening, but they decided they were going to remain present. They were going to love. They were going to serve. They refused to turn away, and that matters. Look who on this Easter Sunday morning is showing up to the tomb. 2 women showing up with some spices. They couldn't prevent what happened, but they're coming to serve, trying to figure out how are we going to deal with this stone. God said, I already took care of that. They get there and the stone's already rolled out the way. And y'all, this really matters, the power of showing up in Good Friday moments. This really matters because, you see, while God was at work in ways they could not fully grasp, God was using those little faithful acts. People who were willing to just keep showing up. Folks who were willing to give what they have, do whatever it is that they could do. And I tell you what, you can have a church if you've got some folks when they say, somebody needs something, and their hand goes up. Oh, I'll give it, I'll help. They may not be able to fix the world. They may not be able to bring all the divisions together, but they'll be at church next week. They'll give what they have. They'll love folks that God puts in their lives. And y'all, God can work with that. Good Friday faith teaches us that, yeah, there is the rejection and the suffering. There's also the folks who are going to keep showing up. And God connects their faithful acts with his great power. And as I pivot to these final 2 points, you'll notice both the text in Acts and Matthew 28 holds the resurrection with the Great Commission. It's very interesting that the text begins with the story of the resurrection. It ends with Jesus sending people out into the world, which again is why the resurrection is so relevant for the church today, because the resurrection reveals God's power through grace. You see, the difference between God's power and human power is so often arrogant, brutal, dishonest. But look at God's power on display in this story. Yes, God demonstrates God's power by raising his son from the dead. Death does not win. Violence does not win. Rejection does not win. No, God does. But see also the grace and how God deals with people. Because so many of the people that were around Jesus failed him in this moment, which has been the whole impetus of this entire series for Lent, when the gospel meets human failure. And what does God do in this moment of failure? Look at how what does Jesus do? Jesus says, look, tell the disciples, I'll meet them in Galilee. They're hiding, they're afraid. I'll come to where they are. I don't know if y'all see this. He didn't come and say, I can't believe. Why are you hiding? No, he sought them out. There's a beautiful story in John chapter 21 where Jesus goes to Peter and he asks him 3 times, Simon, do you love me? Simon, do you love me? Feed my sheep. God exercises his tremendous power by making the decision, I'm not going to abandon them because they did not understand, because they failed me. I'm not going to wash my hands of them. And that's so interesting in cancel culture, because as soon as you mess up, as soon as you say the wrong thing, believe the wrong thing, folks are ready to just write you off. That's all that you are, is just that. But even when they failed, God come in flesh, Jesus comes back to them with grace. He speaks peace, he restores, and then he does the unthinkable. He sends those very folks out into the world to tell them about him. Can you imagine Peter having to go out and preach, and some of the folks in the crowd are the ones who saw him denying Jesus? And they're kind of looking like, how could you be preaching now? I saw what you did. But you can't care about that. You have to receive God's amazing grace. You have to receive God's amazing forgiveness and go out and tell it anyway. Because God does not wait for perfect people to accomplish divine purposes. Nah. God is omnipotent and omniscient, knows how to work with imperfect people in an imperfect world to manifest his powerful, perfect will. Which takes me to my last point. Resurrection refuses to let our failure be final. I tried to preach this series in a way that holds human failure in a healthy tension with this sovereign, powerful thing that God is doing in his son, Jesus Christ. And when we read the stories of the disciples, and it's easy to sort of look at them and to say, oh man, how could they not believe? But their story is also our story. Because in many ways, the church today stands in the same place as those disciples. We too have failed to live out our mission. You remember Jesus rebuking Peter. Jesus saying, you don't care about the concerns of God. You're only concerned about the concerns of the world. And that's not just Peter. That's also us. Using God, using church, using religion, all for what we can get out of it. And as soon as God needs us to sacrifice and to extend ourselves, then we want to start coming up with all the excuses why. Well, I just don't have time. It's just not a good time for me. We're in a cultural moment where you have so many millions of people who believe in God, but they don't want to have anything to do with the church. You hear the hashtags, church hurt, You hear folks talking about the disillusionment, the disappointment. And if we're honest, some of the criticism, it is deserved. Our churches have turned people away. But the resurrection tells us something greater. That the same Jesus we misunderstood, the same Jesus we misrepresent, the same Jesus we refuse to give witness to, it's the same Jesus who keeps coming back to us, not with condemnation, but with grace. Dr. Brogdon is not preaching today with a hammer. This is not a "I told you so" moment. No, this is an invitation for grace. That you're sitting there not knowing what to make of this moment, the times in which we find ourselves. It looks as if it's hopeless for this nation to have a turnaround and to be and to do better. The power of the resurrection lets us know that no matter the gravity, the depths of human depravity, no matter how far we have fallen, the resurrection reminds us that we don't have the final word. That God has enough power, enough grace to work with us. That God has not given up on us. That God has not given up on this country. And it may not look like it to you, but God is moving in this country. And just because you can't recognize it, just because it doesn't look like it, does not mean God is not at work. Maybe God is stirring in the lives of those who are willing, in spite of the doubts, in spite of the reservations, in spite of their inability to make sense of everything, they're just willing to show up. They're the kind of folks that say, "I'll see you next Sunday." They're the kind of folks that'll say, "I'll see you on next Wednesday." They're the kind of folks that'll say, wherever I'm needed, Lord, just use me. Because they know it's not always in what everyone can see, but it's the quiet, mysterious ways God is at work, already turning the world on its head. I want to issue an invitation to some of you who you've been going through a difficult season in your journey of faith. You've been feeling disconnected, been feeling lost, not knowing where's my purpose, where do I fit in. Resurrection refuses to let failure be final. That no matter where you are, God is looking for you. God is at work offering an invitation for you to start anew. What's powerful and beautiful about the gospel is that how many times we get to just start over. It's a wonderful thing. And this is why the resurrection matters so much, because it reminds us that no matter where we are, God is not finished with us yet. That maybe there are some reasons for your journey that you can't fully make sense of. And you don't have to wait until it all makes sense. Just start the path. And God will help you to begin to make the kind of connections and to give the meaning needed. That's not only going to help you to make sense of your path, but it's going to illumine the path ahead, because often you have gone through some things that's going to be a part of the work God wants to do in your lives. Some of the tears that you have cried, some of those moments of heartbreak and despair, God's going to do something so transformative in your life that it becomes the grounds that you start reaching out to share that with others. Because not only are you where you are, others are where you are. And God can use you to touch them and to bless them. And so as I take my seat, I hope you feel encouraged that no matter as you look at what's in your hands, the story I started with when I started my tenure here as interim pastor is the story I want to end this message with, and that's the story of the fishes and the loaves. The boy gave his lunch, the little that he had, put it in the hands of Jesus, and Jesus multiplied and did with that little lunch what that boy or any of the disciples would have been able to do. And that's the power of the resurrection. It is taking your little feeble efforts, what is entrusted to you, and putting it in his hands and seeing what God does with it. Because what you can count, that's your last word. What happens when you put it in God's hands, that's God's last word. And let the church say, amen.